Yo, I put it like wow, this that sound. These oaks don't work hard like me, I hope they know by now. Bayo bad, stand my ground. Bro, these money trees go overseas like Percy Tau. I'll make sure you stay around, quiet when I'm under loud. No negatives allowed, me and positivity took a vow. I always play to win, don't anticipate loss. Mind always in the clown, my boy. Never think about the drop, never ever ever think about the drop.
Welcome to it, sports fans. It is the MKT Show podcast. The Springboks lose or New Zealand win. Depends how you look at it. The All Blacks, an all-time shocker, of course, if you are a Springbok fan. Ellis Park, they lose. They never lose there until now. But I mean, what a performance by the All Blacks. We're going to get into all of that. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little top 14. Rassie Rasmus, as he always does, the Springboks seem to do this all the time. He's made changes on Monday. He's already announced the team, so we'll get into that and what it means as well. And then we'll answer a listener question as well. And by the way, MKT Show, the MKT Show, MKT inspires. If you want to slide in the DMs to get your question answered right here on the show. But joining me, as always, we're going to talk all things rugby's greatest rivalry. Lesego Thomas, Lesego, what's happening? Are you sad? How are you feeling as a Springbok fan?
Hello, mate. Good to be back. Am I sad? Not necessarily sad. Am I surprised? Definitely surprised. Obviously, much like everybody else, really didn't see that coming. If one were to be frank and honest, but you know, a good display from the one side and an interesting approach on the other, which led to the result, which I suppose we'll get into now.
We'll get into. All right, let's get into that. I think I'll give my thoughts, and then we'll get into it. Springboks lost 33-16, and from my side, it was a really interesting test match because I thought New Zealand were really, really smart early on to stay away from the contact stuff. We could see what New Zealand were trying to do. I thought Dave Rennie did a great job. He clearly told his guys the scrums are not an option. And I mean, there were only basically, 3 scrums, I think, in the whole first half. That was deliberate by the All Blacks. It went back to sort of late 90s, early noughties New Zealand rugby, where they want to play the game out wide. Let the athletes do it because they know they cannot win that physical contest against South Africa's first team. So I thought that was really smart, and the Springboks really, really dominated in that first 25 minutes, and they didn't assert themselves. I thought I have a bias to always kick the points, and I thought the Springboks were, I don't think arrogant. I think there was a lack of cool heads and leadership on the field, and I think Siya Kolisi was missed maybe in this sense. After you don't get the first one, after you don't get the second one, maybe it's time to go for poles. But even then, I think you should always be going for poles. You should always be going for poles. It's hard enough to get into the 22. It's hard enough to create opportunities for points. And what you've got to do, and one of the reasons I like going for points that I think is important for the Boks going forward, you have to tell your team, we trust that you'll get the ball back. We trust our structures, that if we score points, we'll regather, and we've got a plan to sort of play out, whether it's a box kick for touch. We've got plans to get out, and you've got to show the team that I trust the guys. And I think Siya Kolisi's leadership maybe missed, and it should be worrying for the Springboks that there isn't really plan B for calm heads to prevail. Those are my thoughts. Lesego, what did you think of the game in 33-16?
Yeah, just on the point about Sia's leadership, I think, you know, any doubt about his role in this squad was clear to be seen in its absence from Saturday. I do think that there was a lack of some of the calls and decision-making that, you know, he would have done a better job of. I do think that his presence in and around the breakdowns, especially on the offensive breakdowns, is something that was missing. And I just think, you know, the presence that he has in that number 6 jersey, I think, you know, if I'm Tupou Vai, who I think had a great game in the number 6 jumper for the All Blacks, and I'm looking at my opposite number being a Paul de Villiers, whose, you know, biggest attribute was the ball fetching at the breakdowns, on the defensive breakdowns. Once that it gets nullified, there really isn't much that is on offer, and that's why he was able to have the game that he had. I think he assisted about 2 tries. He was running riot out on the touchline, on the offensive side of the ball, and just had an out-and-out great game. And I think someone like Rassie Kolisi, if he's on the opposite end, nullifies that as quick as possible. So his presence or his absence, or his presence was definitely needed, and his absence was definitely felt in Sia. But all credit has to go to the All Blacks, I think. I think they played a smart game, to your point. I think they executed their game plan really, really, really well. The defensive side of their game, a lot of credit has to go to Tana Umaga, who's a defensive coach for the All Blacks. I think, limiting missed tackles, ensuring that the biggest offensive threats coming from the Springboks were double teamed, and thus stopped us to not be given much of an advantage, or to get over the advantage line as often as they would have liked. To be able to nullify that, to be able to do that consistently enough to start seeding, the creeping doubts that ultimately snowballed throughout the course of the game. If you're looking at it from the Springboks perspective, credit has to go to Tana Umaga and the work that he did there. I think as well, being very smart in some of the in the calls that they made as well, and just keeping themselves in the fight long enough to be rewarded in the end, which is ultimately what happened. I think they did a great job of absorbing and circumventing the threat of the scrum. I think they did a really, really, really good job of fronting up against the maul, and knew that once you are able to work around those 2 big threats of theirs, then all of a sudden you're in the game. And that's what they did. And they did that long enough. I think once their front row, the Springboks front row, got substituted, so once Ox, Marks, and Lowe then came off, the reserve or the backups front row was not as strong, and the refreshed front row from the All Black side of things, theirs was stronger than the starting front row. So then that, nullified whatever other threat that could have come from the scrum from that point onwards. And I think that's just a testament of, one of the classic things we learn in sport, where if you are going against someone who's stronger than you in a number, if not all facets or departments of a game, you don't necessarily try to outmuscle them. You just keep yourself within range so that when the opportunities open up down the stretch, you're able to then take advantage of that. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think you saw that with Fabian Holland's charge down and how that flipped the whole game on its head. You saw that with, there was a Cam Roygaard and how he, a different bounce of the ball, he just sat down, and that's another try. But that came from broken open play, which was exploited by Jordy Barrett, who had a great game, I think, as well as Damien McKenzie as well, in uncharacteristic fashion. And lastly, Luke Jacobson, his try, and then Will Jordan's second try, all from just the reward of keeping themselves in the fight, which looked a little bit like how they lost the game against the Wallabies last year at the same ground, where the Wallabies' flurry of tries came from the 65th minute, and again, just keeping themselves within reach and pouncing on the opportunities that presented themselves and then running from that point onwards. That's exactly what the All Blacks did. It was a result of a well-executed game plan from their side of things. And, the way in which they won it and the confidence that was oozing from the whole team thereafter really, really, really makes, the rest of the series, especially the second test, very, very interesting, because they'll definitely be bouncing with confidence. It will be interesting to see how the Springboks respond. But as far as this past Sunday goes, great execution of the game plan from the All Blacks.
I thought the Sia thing, the one part that was quite clear was how much Jasper Wiese was carrying the ball, because Pieter-Steph du Toit is a great ball carrier, but he, as a first receiver, he's not great because he doesn't actually have that explosive pace. You almost need to put him into what they call the outside shoulder, right? So it probably needs to be second, third phase for him to be collecting the ball, as opposed to Jasper Wiese, who's got explosive power, explosive pace, but it makes you one-dimensional. Whereas if you've got Sia is also, he's a great explosive first receiver ball carrier, especially with Grant Williams who'll pick up and go. So that was really, really evident to me. And as you say, what it allowed the All Blacks loose forwards to do was to play in the outside channels, because you can deal with Jasper Wiese by himself. When you've got Sia as well with the ball carrying, of course, you talk about his work in and around breakdowns on both sides of the ball. But I thought it was quite clear that the All Blacks could actually let their loose forwards play in the wide channels, and that created a lot of the tries, especially with the injuries when Jesse Creel looked unbelievably uncomfortable on the wing, especially on defense. So that was just one thing there. But I thought something which we discussed last week, Lesego, was, and I've said this for years, by the way, anybody who's listened to the MKT show, I've said it for years about Pollard. The reason I want Pollard, and we spoke about it last week, and Sasha Feinberg-Ngomezulu, people blaming the injuries, he's coming back from injury. I said, no. This is how he plays, right? Is the lack of control, considering how much the Boks were in their ascendancy, especially in this first 25 minutes. Yes, handling errors in the 22, yes, all of that. But considering the dominance that they had, right? Where were the real try-scoring opportunities? They were dominant, but they weren't whereas Pollard with his structure, he's going to make sure that, listen guys, first, second, third phase, if we're not creating, there's an up and under. Even if we're in the 22, I'm using the boot to create a different situation. Whereas Sasha, it was almost first of all, there's no control. It was all helter-skelter. And even if that's not working, it's do plan A harder. You know, this is almost like high school rugby or under 9 rugby. It's plan B is do plan A better. And it just didn't work. There was absolutely no control. I thought Grant Williams had the worst game I've ever seen him have in a Springbok jersey. Forget the charge down. Everything from the base of play, he gave us absolutely no direction. But I thought Sasha was incredibly poor. Again, in the one thing where I'm critical, decision-making. And he's making it up as he goes along. And I thought that was so evident, especially when the Boks were dominant. I thought that was really worrying. I didn't enjoy that part in the first 25, and I was losing my mind here, sitting alone watching. I don't know what you think.
You know, interesting. Look, there's no going around that reality, right? I mean, a lot of what did not go right in our attack, in our go forward, starts at the fly position. It starts from the fly, from the halfback pairing, right? Didn't help Grant Williams' case that he was going against the best scrum off in the world in Cam Roigard, who I think had a brilliant game, as he does, a standard 8 out of 10 operator. So that just magnified the severity in how bad Grant Williams played in the game. But what I noticed from Sasha's point of view was that in the moments where he tried the quote-unquote predictable approach, he seemed uncomfortable. He seemed like it was not his space and it wasn't necessarily his forte. And what you then started to see from that point was the instinct to go and do what he normally does. I mean, there was this one handling error that came from him deciding to take a flat pass when the ball was headed towards Pieter-Steph. And what then should have happened is, had he then stayed, Pieter-Steph would have gotten it. He would have swung it behind. It would have gotten to Grant Williams, who would have looped up again, then creating, just the extra man, so that then the ball would have then been able to go down the line. But instead of doing that, he then felt the need to go and take it flat. Likewise, there was again another play that took place on the touchlines where you ask yourself, why is the number 10 at the touchlines first and foremost in broken play? But he finds himself there. And again, another handling error came from the instinct of trying to grab a game by the scruff of his neck, as opposed to just staying within your allocated space from which you're given to operate. So I saw that to be quite, discouraging, because it then makes one wonder a question that if you get bored, or if you struggle to just do the job required of you to do in the game, then, by virtue of that, there's not, and we don't want to say this, and we don't want to wish, the worst for any career, but it kind of makes it hard to justify any sort of, way or reason to play in the setup, So obviously we're not wishing that happened, but, if you're unable to do your job or the job required of you, then, then you would make all our games that we play pretty difficult, or those of the Springboks. So I found those to be quite concerning.
But hold on. I have a question there for you, right? Is that one of the things about him was I haven't heard enough discourse about Tony Brown leaving. And Tony Brown likes that kind of player. So Tony Brown he's more able to get a hold of a flair player and create a structure for Sasha. When Sasha was playing his best rugby, it was under Tony Brown, right? We have to be honest, where Tony Brown likes that 90s, like Tony Brown played, right? He wants to take the ball flat because what he wants is the playmaker delivering a flat pass. So he wants Sasha, it's actually Sasha's dream, if you think about it, where Sasha wants to play up against the defenders and use his instincts more. But I think Tony Brown's way of coaching was very, very different from what we saw with the box setup, where the rest of the guys almost felt behind him. And I'm with you in terms of Sasha. But here's my question to you, Lesego. And I think this is an important thing that Springbok Rugby has to answer it now, not in a year's time. It's the World Cup then. Can you live with the unpredictability, right, for the payoff that could come consistently? Or do you just say, you know what? As the All Blacks only found out, I thought it was crazy that Beauden Barrett ever got World Player of the Year because, I've said this to you, he's a gadget guy. He's not anything. He can play a bit of wing. He's got a bit of pace. He's got a bit of flair. And it was exciting for that first year. But I was like, this is not going to work. It's not going to work. And again, I love to say it. I was dead right. The boring Richie Mwanga had to come back. So my thing with Sasha, are you Springbok fans? Are you willing to live with the unpredictability? Or, as I've been saying, just put Pollard in. Just put the guy I know is going to put me on the front foot 95% of the time. And people talk about Pollard like all he's got is a boot. Pollard has playmaking. It's just not his default setting at test level. Like, what are you thinking there? What are you willing to live with, Bok fans?
It depends on the game that's being played, right? I mean, if this past Sunday was a World Cup final, I think we all know exactly who was going to be starting. Right, I think this series, whilst it is and if a World Cup is on the line and there's no room to experiment and there's no room to necessarily develop players, I think we go with the insurance policy, no pun intended. But the reality of the matter is that between now and the end of the year, let's not even go to 2027. Between now and the end of the year, there are 7-8 games. So and within that, there's not as much on the line, if anything at all. So if there's any time for there to be any sort of unpredictability, it's now. And I also do think that there's no real point in playing a Pollard now. There's no real point in giving Pollard all the games between now and the end of the year and all the games between now and the World Cup final should the Boks get there, right? So if there's any time to really develop all other talents and all other players in that position and create the depth, which has been the MO of the Springboks, it's now. And I think that's what's happening. I think to expect a finished article at this stage may be a little bit naive. I think now's the time. There has to be a little bit of an understanding that says, listen, we are very much building the players and building the squad that we wanted to take to the World Cup. And in building, there will be glimpses and errors and shortcomings that we have seen. But there will be a point where a call has to be made. When that point ultimately is, we don't know. But as far as the current is concerned, there's definitely chopping and changing and experimenting that's happening, all with the World Cup in mind. So, yeah, there's no need to play Pollard right now. Coaches should do what they do. And I suppose when the time comes to decide who the final squad is and who the player ultimately will be at fly half, then that call will be made at that particular time.
We'll get into that a bit more just now in terms of between World Cups, how you should be conducting yourself. But I want to make it clear what my position is. I've just seen this too much in sport before. Jack Grealish, I think the best footballer England's produced, certainly in my time, the great Paul Gascoigne, right, is the thing about talented people. If you enable them early, they never go back. They never ever go back. If you're a rugby fan of the All Blacks, Carlos Spencer, even at the club level, Super Rugby level, they enabled Carlos Spencer's Maverick early, and nobody ever said a thing because it's like a shiny toy. People let charming, good-looking, talented people get away with more, and if you don't stop them early, you forget it. Forget it. I think South African rugby has enabled Sasha Feinberg Mgomezulu way too much too early. They didn't curb his enthusiasm early. And the other thing, I will always say it about men, they've paid him as well. And not just Spock Rugby has paid him. The endorsements have paid him. Social media loves him. We live in a different time now. They've rewarded him for being who he is. And one thing about men, once you reward them with money, forget it. So I don't think it's ever going to change because he's been rewarded and allowed to do this. It's very, very difficult to pull it back. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know. MKT Inspires on social media. Instagram's probably the best. Slide in the DMs. Otherwise, leave a comment below. Do you think Sasha Feinberg Mgomezulu is going to become a gadget player like Bowden Barrett, or can he specialize at 10 or 15? I'd love to hear what you guys think. All right, Lesego, I want to move on to something you were kind of touching on there a little bit, and the value of winning between World Cups. It's something which we're going to address a listener question a bit later, which is related to this, but we'll address it at the end. It's something which I really, really do not understand why, especially the Springbok fans, cannot get their head around. I see no value in being the All Blacks circa 1997 to 2006. Always winning, always boasting about 99% win rate between World Cups, which is great, for the Google page or Wikipedia page. But I'm like, the business model and the biggest prize in rugby is the World Cup. Like World Cup, Tri-Nations, and then whatever other nonsense you're putting out there. The Six Nations has its value historically, but let's be honest, real rugby gets played in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly in South Africa and New Zealand. So in terms of quality of competition, the Rugby World Cup's all we care about, right? And nobody boasts about, oh, look how many Tri-Nations we've got, look how many Six Nations we've got, and gets taken seriously. Why do you think the Northern Hemisphere teams are so insecure every time a Springbok or a New Zealand fan talks to them? It's because the Springboks say, we've got 4 World Cups. The whole of the Northern Hemisphere has one. You invented the sport and you've got one. That's the one they get sensitive about. So for me, the value of winning between World Cups is ridiculous. Jake White actually showed you the model, and the great Sir Graham Henry. Just spend that time accumulating caps, accumulating industry experience, and don't worry so much about the outcome, because let's face it, New Zealand and South Africa have enough talent that you're going to win most games. Can you, in that time, make sure that the average age of the squad doesn't get to 30? And also make sure that when guys get to the next World Cup, everybody in the squad has at least 30 test matches that they've played. That is what I think. Lesego, what are your thoughts on, forget about results, get experience between World Cups? Because I think it's silly that people care so much about winning between World Cups.
It's an interesting point, that Tim. And the interest and why I say so is because you kind of have to ask yourself, I mean, can you win a World Cup without winning the games leading up to the World Cup? Can you win a World Cup without creating any momentum going into a World Cup? And that's the balance.
Well, I'll answer that. No, hold on. I'll answer that. I only care about the last 6 months. And if you look at Jake White, you remember they lost, was it 49-0 in his first game against Australia in their first year? And everybody said, oh, you remember that?
In 2006,
right? You remember... Yeah, Sir Graham Henry, similar story. They were kind of turning it over. They were getting rid of the drinkers in the team because that was a huge problem. With the ethos of better people make better All Blacks, they had to get rid of the Umangas and all these guys who drink too much, and even the great Jerry Collins, bless him. But that era, what cost All Black rugby, Ian Foster in his great book said, nah, these guys drink too much. It's about all the other stuff, and they brought in sort of the new era. But in the last year, even you remember England when they were doing it. England went to New Zealand in that last year. It wasn't the whole thing. Johnny Wilkinson was ridiculous. But in that last year, you remember they went to New Zealand. It was the first time where they worried about, we have to win in New Zealand. And they did what they did, and that carried on. So I would say the last maybe 12 months is important. But the other 3 years, I don't know. I think it's a good question. But no, I think... Don't worry about the first 3 years. Just win in that last year, and if you've built it correctly, you'll win anyway.
Yeah. So I suppose then the question then comes is what then do you prioritize in the 4 years, right? Because again, I agree. You want to create. The point is you want to create enough momentum going into the competition so that by the time you get to the World Cup, you are not switching the machine on. The machine has to be on well in advance, right? Whether that's 6 months, whether that's 12 months, I suppose that varies per team that has ultimately won this competition. The 3 years prior, whether you are making, let's even look at Rassie's first World Cup. Rassie only came in 2018, right? The beginning of 2018, 2 years out from winning the competition. So, and the 2 years prior to that, there was the whole fiasco with, Alistair Coetzee and the players that he went with and all that sort of stuff, which just was not working. So what you then do is, if the question is, do you prioritize winning over everything else in the 4 years? My answer to that is no. But do you prioritize making the right interventions to ensure that by year 4, you're in the best position to win the World Cup? The answer is yes. What those interventions are vary, whether it's changing a culture, whether it is, changing a captain, whether it's, looking to bring in a whole new generation from the lower ranks and give them the adequate experience so that by the time they get into year 4, they're well prepared and they can adequately compete. It varies, but it's ultimately not prioritizing winning in the cycle at the expense, potentially, of winning at the World Cup a few years thereafter. If that is the dynamic, I would agree. It's not worth doing. So, which is why then, interestingly, if we then look at the Springboks approach in this game, right? Like I said now, we all know if this past Saturday was a World Cup final, you can bet the house that Handré Pollard would be starting. Right? The only reason why Handré Pollard is starting this Saturday, actually, is so as to rescue the series, right? If there was room for risk, Handré Pollard would not be starting because he has to be preserved for when it ultimately matters the most. And instead, in place of then playing him, you then introduce others whom you can then, whether it's give experience to, broaden the talent pool, deepen your squad, whatever the approach or the idea or the modus operandi may be, you execute it. But when the moment matters most, that's when you go and put in the ones that will deliver the most. So that is definitely not all the games in the 4-year cycle. And I think what the approach is depends on the team, the players in the team, the coach, and the surrounding context in which that team finds itself in. Does it need to radically change things around? Does it need to just gradually build what it currently has? It varies, but it's ultimately so as to build towards eventually winning, not necessarily winning in the process.
Modus operandi. I like that. A little bit of Latin. You're showing a lot of latitude. I'm actually... I'm happy that your mother can now actually say it was worth it for me to work as hard as I did to send this guy to half decent school, because you're just casually using modus operandi. It's very, very impressive. Not very many rugby podcasts are going to deliver modus operandi. But no, I think you make a lot of interesting points there, which again comes back to something really, really interesting. The Springboks are funny, right? Aren't the Springboks funny? Because I have to say this as a South African, like, things are tough in South Africa. We have to just call it what it is. And I don't think you can separate in South Africa, purely in our context. I know some countries that are first world countries, you can separate your entertainment, your sport, versus the country's sort of political and everyday situation. But the Springboks are unique in that for 80 minutes, it is truly one of the only things that makes South Africans. It doesn't matter where you are on the demographic, right? Even if you can't watch, which sometimes is a big problem because it's obviously behind a paywall that 85% of South Africans can't really afford. That's its own issue. But people love to say the Springboks are winners, because even if you can't, just the glow of the Springboks for that 80 minutes puts a responsibility on Rassie Erasmus, which at the beginning, I think Rassie was kind of playing into it. But I do think it's real for the Springboks, that it's like, no, you guys are actually affecting the self-image of South Africans. And I don't think that's play now. I don't think that's just like a cute sort of Madiba Magic type romance. It's like, if the Springboks lose, it's like, like the one thing we've got, if you know what I mean. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but I think for South Africans, it's a little bit deeper than, if New Zealand or England lose, it's like, whatever. We've still got social grants that are going to work. We've got our society safe. People are going to eat. Nobody's going to sleep on the street in New Zealand. They're an unbelievably wealthy country. England, unbelievably wealthy country. For the Boks, it's a big thing to win, hey? So I don't know if Rassie's kind of caught in that thing, because they've also positioned themselves as like the people's team. And once you do that, it's like you can't take your foot off the brake. You know what I'm saying? You feel me?
I do. But it's an interesting one, huh? Because now the need to win and the importance of winning, to your point, in the context of the greater country, is increasingly heightened by the year, right? If you look at, the responsibility that the Springboks had, the societal responsibility that the Springboks had in 2016, 2026 versus 2025 versus, if you just go back by each year, you will see how it has gradually improved and the country gradually buys into it a lot more, which I would imagine places a bit of pressure to, win, such games. That's why if I've been, having watched the game out here in SA this past weekend, it took a bit of a knock, Like, it took a bit of a knock because, our record, at least recently, against the All Blacks has, been positive. We've beaten them a lot more than we've lost to them in recent memory. We beat them in the World Cup final, obviously. And, to have been beaten in that manner that we did, having played the team that would actually go and play a World Cup final, had it been a World Cup final, barring Henry Pollard potentially, if we're to be honest, or maybe even Kobus Reinach, right? But for the most, we had our best scrum, we had our two best blocks, we had our best available loose trio, we had our best ever center pairing, we had our two wings, we had our starting the back three that won the World Cup. We had our best team. And we went and lost in that manner that we did. And I think the reason why we led with our best team is so as to go and get the win, so as to get a good standing in the series, but also just to, make South Africans feel lacquer for a little bit. And to have not gotten the result, having prioritized the win in that instance, makes things a little bit interesting and a little bit tricky, because now if you chop and change, by design, you actually would weaken the squad, because you went with your first /A team. And if you're experimenting this much too soon, then you just could potentially make what is already a bad situation a lot worse. So it's a very, very interesting position. You know, it's a curse of the responsibility of being South Africa's smile keeper, if you like.
Smile keeper, I like that. Listen, I need to ask you a very serious question because my cousin was texting me. He's a big-time rugby guy. And he said something which I had I've been feeling this for like a couple of years. And then I thought to myself, and I haven't texted him back, but I thought I'd ask you, do we need a new Sangoma? Because our number 5 lock position, has been consistently injured, right, the last 4 years. Like, isn't it crazy that we can't keep a lock? I mean, we cannot keep a number 5 lock fit. So do we get a new Sangoma? What is going on there? Our 3 best number 5 locks, including Luet, is never available. And it's not like, he stubbed his toe on the couch going to the bathroom at midnight. No, it's like, his Achilles tendon. It's always like 12 months the guy's out. And all 3 of them. It's crazy. So do we change Sangoma? Well, what is going on there? Lesego, you know all about lock. That's your spot, right?
Allegedly. But no, all jokes aside, it is concerning. It is concerning that, even if you look at who was the last World Cup winning number 5 in Franco Mostert, he is a lock. He's a hybrid, right? A lock and 7. It's not the kind of position that you want to be in, right? I mean, and it just seems to be that second row generally, you know. I mean, if you go and you look at a player like Riley Norton, who, days after being included in the Springbok setup, went and did his hamstring, right? I mean, Luet came back for a little bit, doesn't seem to be all right now. Franco, we don't know what's going on there. Erge is out for the entire year. So, maybe if it's another Sangoma, we might just have to explore those avenues, wouldn't we? But, everything with time, and hopefully time does its thing and the players can eventually be up and running again when they need to be most.
So my grandmother was a Venda, right? So she married into my mother's side, which is Sepedi. And for those who don't know, it's a tribe in the north of South Africa. So just so people know, if you want a Sangoma or what people would call a witch doctor in the Western world, or where Lesego and these guys that go to these proper schools live in the big cities, they call it a witch doctor there. If you want to go to the source, you need a Venda witch doctor. So I think Rassie needs to be talking to Cyril, because Cyril's obviously one of the mandem. Go up north, get yourself a Sangoma, and get Argia, get Luet and those guys to just go and appease the ancestors. And I'm telling you, we're going to, as the youth say, we going to be Gucci. We going to be good if they do that. Your thoughts, guys, let me know in the chat. And let me know in the comments below. Should we prioritize winning between World Cups, or should we just be worried about the World Cup? And if you're a Springbok fan, does it matter more to you to win every game? Is it a mindset thing, as Lesego was saying? Or should we just, you let it go and just worry about the World Cup? And if you're a global fan of rugby, do you want your team constantly putting out the best 15 instead of accumulating caps and trying to sort of balance the average age of the squad? Because that's a really important thing. Put in the comments, MKT Inspires, the MKT show on all social media. Let me know your thoughts. Remember, you can send me a DM, the MKT show, MKT Inspires, and we can answer your question on the show. Otherwise, leave it in the comments here on YouTube. Lesego, you talked a little bit about Pollard being in the side. Rassie has made changes. I want to talk about the 4 changes that he's made. He's decided to name the squad on the Monday. I was sort of busy with meetings and things this morning. I didn't hear anything about the possibility of him sort of making changes. So just from your side, I know you're really plugged into not necessarily the Springbok setup, but just the sports world in South Africa. You've got contacts everywhere. Had you heard that Rassie was going to make changes, or is this a knee-jerk reaction from Rassie after a bitterly disappointing first test?
Yeah, I think to answer the question directly, yes. there was an expectation for him to announce it at 11 a.m. this morning, which he didn't make it up on. But to your point, it was more a return to factory settings. I think, if you look at him approaching last week and waiting until the Thursday and having declared that the reason why he did so was out of respect for the All Blacks and nothing else. And I don't think that was a joke. I think if you look at the record, which now stands 4 to Dave Rennie and 1 to Rassie, having played 5 matches altogether in their respective head-to-head. So there's definitely a high level of respect from Rassie, and by virtue of that, the Springboks for this particular All Black setup. And he might have shown perhaps a bit too much last week, whereas now it's just the no BS, no nonsense. And I announced the squad on Monday. This is what we have to offer. This is what we'll be going into Saturday with. And he's declared that and he's announced that. And yes, as you've mentioned, there are a couple of changes.
To the changes. Before we get into the changes. Yeah, I think before we get into that, I thought you're making some really interesting points about Rassie, Dave Rennie, etc. But I think it's quite interesting, the mind games that Rassie has always played. And, everything he does now kind of feels like he's sort of going down that road of all of that. I do think the All Blacks, though, it's an interesting thing. So I just so people know, people who've been listening to the podcast for the last 7-8 years understand, I watch sport with no commentary. And this is because for what I do, I know what I'm watching, right? So I don't like the commentators to influence what I'm thinking. I always want to have a sort of fresh take. So when I come on here, I'm saying what I'm saying, because when you watch with commentary, no matter who you are, it's going to lean you either way, you know. So I didn't hear what the South African commentators were saying. But one of the things I thought to myself, a concern for the All Blacks, although they won the test match, I thought this is the best front row they've got. If they were struggling like that in the first 25 minutes, I mean, you spoke a little bit earlier about this is the best Bok front row, but the Boks have some explosive guys that have come in. So I think it's really, really interesting to see Rassie kind of refresh the bomb squad, as we're going to get into, how the All Blacks live with that in terms of another explosive pack coming off, because we saw what happened, as Lesego said, when the Boks brought the bench on. So yeah, Lesego, I don't know what the commentators said about the New Zealand front row, but I thought, oh my goodness, if this is the best you've got to offer, I'm not sure this is the best Bok bench. What did you think about the decimation of that All Black front row?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you are going against Ox, Malcolm Marx, and Volcano, I don't care which front row you are. In fact, I remember specifically having a conversation with, once Volcano had gone up into the scene and almost been blooded and introduced into the Springbok setup, and we're starting to see a lot more of him. And if you recall, he had arrived at already 145 kilograms. And the comment then in that said conversation was, I don't think we're going to lose a scrum ever, or at least for the next 10 years. And that wasn't a joke, right? And that was a joke. However, what I did notice, which was very interesting, which I alluded to earlier in this particular conversation, is that yes, in the first half, whilst the front three was still the starting front three, it was not a contest at all. I mean, the Springboks were head and shoulders and significantly better than the All Black setup. I do think, though, that once we started to see the replacement front row from the All Black side and that of the Springboks as well, that competitiveness and the gap narrowed. If you recall, there was the one penalty that the All Blacks that the Springboks conceded on the All Blacks 5-meter line from the scrum.
Yeah,
which is uncharacteristic, right? Which is uncharacteristic, and I thought that was pretty interesting, because what that said to me is, it's all good and well for your starting front row to be as powerful as ours was. But if the bomb squad, or the front row of the bomb squad, is that much lesser in terms of quality than your starting front row, then that advantage is fractured by design. And that's exactly what happened, you know? So all of a sudden what you're starting to see is it wasn't that out and out dominance. It was a very steady scrum that you were seeing once you saw both sets of front rows get replaced. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And to your point, I mean, now, that is definitely something that I would imagine the Springbok coaches would have picked up on and would want to maintain right up until the 80th minute. Because, the further down we go, we see the All Black side, they're ready to go to the gutters should need be. So I suppose the question is, this All Black side in particular. So I suppose the question now is how deep is deep, and how deep is
deep? All right, so the Boks have made 4 changes. So let's have a look at the lineups. We've got the graphic. I mean, for those on the podcast, you can come over to YouTube and have a look. So he's made 4 changes: Pollard, Reinach, Hooker. At left wing, Ethan Hooker, and then Sia Kolisi has been put as a slash with Paul de Villiers. So Sia, depending a late fitness test. So I mean, Oxenchair, Malcolm Marx, Vilkalo, Eben Etzebeth, Rowan Nokia, Sia Kolisi, or Paul de Villiers at open side at 6. Pieter-Steph du Toit, who's playing his 100th game, is going to wear the captain's armband, quote unquote captain's armband. So he'll be skipper. Jasper Wiese. Kobus Reinach is a big change. So it's a halfback pairing change. Kobus Reinach, Andre Pollard, Ethan Hooker at left wing, Damien De Allende at inside centre, Jesse Creel back 13, Curtly Orange, he's passed his HIA and concussion test, so he can play, and then Damien Willems at fullback. There's changes on the bench as well. The original bomb squad, loose forward Hooker, utility Swiss Army knife Dion Fourie, Gerard Steenkamp, the explosive Thomas du Toit, Noot de Jager, Andre Esterhuizen, Cameron Hanekom, Mornay van der Berg, and then Sasha Feinberg Mgomezulu as your sort of Swiss Army knife in the back line, so he can cover a couple of positions there. So let's look at your thoughts on those changes. What's Rassie trying to do? I know you spoke about Pollard not having to play between World Cups if all we care about is the World Cup. Big changes. I think the one to talk about is the halfback pairing, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely the change and the news as far as this lineup is concerned. It's no secret that that's where the game was lost, if you ask me, and I suppose many others. The lack of swiftness and just crisp, sharp play and speedy and fast play from the base that ultimately put your back line on the front foot. Followed up by the work that would have come from the fly half was just. So, the steadiness and the sharpness and the speed that Kobus Reinach provides, as well as the experience, likewise with the calm, composed, predictable, quote unquote, but sure, game that Pollard would give you as well, is exactly what the Springboks would want to do. And then again, to my point about the scrum, Thomas du Toit, absolute tank. Right, absolute tank, Monster. extremely strong scrummager as well, and so having
and
him,
great ball carrier. Thomas du Toit, great ball carrier. One of the things that I think the Springboks have lost with Spicy Plum being out is one of the things about him. Nobody gives him credit for being an unbelievable ball carrier and maybe the best prop ever at almost playing second fly half, because I've never seen a prop like him step into the line. Tide Furling's quite good at this for Ireland. Step into the line, give it to me as first receiver, and I'm going to drop it to the fly half, almost like a playmaking at the top of the pod, right? In rugby, they say you form in pods. You could give it to Spicy Plum as first receiver, and he would play make. So either decide to crash, right, and be an unbelievable ball carrier, or let's drop it. I think Thomas du Toit gives you that ball carrying, I think, which is massive, don't you?
Yeah, agreed. So whether he's taking it himself, whether he's, given that playmaking ability, whether it's the scrummaging as well, he just gives a lot of presence that you need coming in at the 55th, 60th minute, and strength and solidity as well, that I, for one, felt they lacked with the changes they made this past Saturday. That's just maintaining that, quality and level of strength, certainly in the scrums, that they want to, and as well to a slightly less extent, the mauls, which they want to dominate right throughout. So I think he's a great addition there. I think Deon Free also comes with not only just the experience, but also the duality of being able to play at flank as well, should they decide that Malcolm Marx would need to exhaust all 80 minutes. And if it indeed turns out to be that sort of game, because I don't think Cody Taylor will. And I think Malcolm Marx is just got that talismanic effect. So I think it might be that level, that sort of game from, in which case Deon Free would then shift off to the flank, and thus Andre Esterhuizen, who did have good touches in the midfield. I mean, he was our try scorer this past weekend. He might also have to then do a job out in the back line again. So it just has, a sense of variety, this bomb squad that we're going with this weekend. But the approach and the game plan is very, very simple. Sticking to our guns, getting behind our best attributes and our best weapons, and going again until they can't go anymore.
So what I was thinking about this, if I'm an All Black, obviously I'm looking to Hooker to kind of expose him, and not Hooker the position, Ethan Hooker on the left wing for the Boks, because how dominant were I was very surprised how dominant the Springboks were in the air. Willems, in fact, that whole back three was so dominant, not just on defense, the Springboks, but when they kicked the up and under. I don't know why the All Blacks were so poor under the defensive ball, which is very un-All Black like. It's a big thing for them, right? So I think Hooker now, let's see what you like in there. I think you might see a bit more. And this will be interesting for me for the All Black half pairing now, because it's like, guys, you won the game when it was wide open, and you could bring your strike runners in out wide. But now you've got a young, raw product on the left wing. Do you have the brain at halfback? I thought something that triggered me a little bit earlier. You said Roy God's the best scrum half in the world. We can get back to that another time. But do they have the brain to play plan B, to say, there's a youngster, let's test him, instead of just playing our quick game and try and expose the massive Springbok players out wide? Can they use the boot to really test Ethan Hooker? I would be doing that. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, right? Ethan Hooker, however, what he does have is height, his size. Whether or not he is good under the high ball is a different story, because we know he is both, a wing as well as an outside center. So, whether being that sort of winger under the high ball and receiving the high ball is his strong point, I suppose, is there to be tested, to the point that you're making. So yes, go for that. But I also do think, you see, my thing as well is, as much as they did try, and as far as how they responded to the Springboks and what they had to offer, the All Blacks, they were very clear on navigating the way around the threats of the Springboks, i.e. the scrum, as well as, as much as they could, as well as the maul, and getting as quickly as possible to playing their game. And I think that would be interesting to do, is can they go back to, playing their game, playing, the quickness of the hands and looking to get over the advantage line by moving the ball, as opposed to, getting players and going with 2-3 at a time to crash over the advantage line. Are they able to then execute that sort of plan, or, will perhaps the inclusion of a Sia make that ball a lot slower for them, and thus, restricting their ability to do that at breakdown? Potentially, Paul de Villiers might have a bit more of a job to do there. It remains to be seen. But I think neither side is going to look to change. I mean, we've obviously seen what the Springbok setup of the Springbok 23 looks like. I do not foresee the All Blacks changing their side much. I don't think there's any reason to, except maybe to give Leroy Cotter a run at number 11, who seems to be, in good standing with Dave Rennie. But outside of that, unless injuries, do take place between now and Saturday, I don't foresee them doing much more changes, which does, set it up pretty well.
What does this say to Sasha Feinberg Mgomezulu? Because we spoke about it just now, right? It's a case of, what do you do? Try and win the test matches between World Cups. Does the series actually matter? But for me, I think it's interesting that Rassie hasn't taken the approach. And he did it with Mani Libok, where Mani was under pressure. He can't kick for poles. But Rassie almost stuck with him through the tough times and said, you know what? It was almost like I almost need to gas my own guy up. Even if we lose, Mani, I'm still with you. Sasha's a bit of an ego guy, right? If you're taking him out, when there's the pressure on, because now it's on the line. If the Boks lose, the best they can do is draw this, right? When it's on the line, it's interesting to me that Rassie hasn't taken the Mani Libok approach. He's taken the, hey, you're out of here, pal. We're not doing this. Isn't that interesting? I think it's very indicative that they can say what they want to the people. Rassie's showing you through his actions that maybe I'm not as sold as everybody else.
Look, it's the certainty, right? It's the certainty to win the game. Everything is on the line now. I don't think the Springboks would want to. I mean, considering all the hype that's gone into this series, right? That's the one part of it. I think the other part is this has not been the strongest All Black era or unit,
Terrible. They've been terrible. No. Lesego, please say it how it is. I call them the New Zealand international men's rugby team. They're not the All Blacks. Don't sugarcoat it. They've been terrible.
Fair enough, right? The point is that to now go and lose to this team, to lose a series in the first two games, a year out of the World Cup, having beaten them by just a point in the Rugby World Cup final, which I will remind Oaks that the All Blacks in that particular game left 5 points on the table. 5 points. There was a missed penalty and a missed conversion, right? And the All Black and the Springboks took all the points on offer there. In other words, had they converted those 5 points, we would have lost that game with everything else having remained the same. So it wasn't an entire blowout against, the team that showed up on the day in the era in which they're in right now. So to now go from there, to now lose this greatest rivalry series in the first two games at home, that will knock the psyche more than any other thing out in the world potentially could. So I think that is on the line, not necessarily the series, but just the psychological state of the entire Springbok unit. And I think for that sake, Pollard is going to come in and has now been instructed to rescue the series on paper, but in between the lines is to rescue everything else that I've just alluded to, i.e. the psychological state of this setup going into next year's Rugby World Cup.
You know what I wish? Sasha could get, like whoever managed Siya Kolisi's career, just from the perception side of things, like whatever's happened. We know about Siya's personal life, like that is what it is. People get divorced, life happens. But the image around Siya was so well manicured, especially at the peak of his powers. Again, I don't think it can happen because I've interviewed Sasha's father, and I just, like, if that's who's advising him, it's only going to get worse. They're going to only take it into overdrive with the sort of reality sportsman superstar thing, which, whatever, that's his choice. I hope somebody can get a hold of Sasha now, before it completely breaks, right? The relationship, the whatever. It's like, dude, he's good looking. He comes from a historical family and he comes from money. So it's not like he's ever going to be poor if rugby ends for him. But he could become a seer type of figure for this new generation because he's mixed race, which matters in South Africa. In South Africa, I'm not talking if you're from New Zealand, England, whatever, you need to stay out of this conversation because race in South Africa matters. So he's mixed race. So it's kind of cool that he's kind of, Zulu mom, Jewish or white father. So that matters in the context of South Africa. He really could be Seer 2.0 if somebody just sat him down and said, dude, can we just bring down the social media reality stuff and just make it about the rugby? Because you're good looking. You come from money. You've got the network. Your grandfather is one of the most historical figures in South Africa. Nobody's going to forget that. Could we just, as a mentor of mine used to say, dude, just keep the main thing the main thing. You don't need to amplify yourself off the field. The Springbok brand will do that for you. And as we saw with Sia, not only will it amplify you in South Africa, Sia Kolisi was in the NBA. He was hanging out with Jurgen Klopp. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, Sia is one of the biggest stars. I would argue maybe the biggest star rugby has ever had. And Sia's personality is about as interesting as a wall inside of a psych ward, right? But because he's such a winner, the Springbok brand, and we know he's with Jay-Z now and the guys at Rock Nation, right? The winning has gone almost Tom Brady style. The winning has made him a superstar. Do you think anybody can get a hold of Sasha and just say, dude, bring the temperature down. You're the fly half of the Springboks, not the fly half of Bishops anymore?
Maybe you should.
Oh yeah. I'll tell you what he's going to do. He's going to go, who's that dickhead over there? Let me listen to him. I'm the Springbok fly off and I'm way better looking.
Yeah, no. Listen,
because sorry, Lesego, I'm worried. Hey, I want to tell you, I'm worried for him. I'm genuinely, I'm worried the direction it's going. That's why I'm saying this. I'm not saying it from, oh my God, I hate him or I'm envious. I'm saying it because I'm just worried for the guy. I've seen this too many times.
Yeah, no. I think it is a question of, we spoke about it in the last episode. It's temperament, right? And I'll inject some optimism in the conversation. I think that temperament and temperament generally is a byproduct of experience and age. Right? Obviously, you get a lot of players that are born with it a lot sooner, and those are the ones that make the greats the greats. But I think generally, temperament is something that is developed the more experienced you become. So, you know what? Hopefully, I hope that, to your point, now that the house is on the line, and you want to go with those whom you trust the most to deliver in such a situation, who absolutely have to deliver in this situation. I think not being chosen for that, I hope rather, signals that, maybe I'm not as high up the pecking order as I thought I might have been, and maybe then inspires him to then double down on those attributes that he needs to, so as to, I suppose, settle out. But
yeah,
again, right? And Peter Steff said it best. This is a system. This is not an organization, and it's not a team that is built around an individual. It is a system that individuals serve. So whether it's injuries or whether it's just, an ineptitude to deliver as required, if you can't, for whatever reason, the next player has to slot in so that job ultimately gets done, because it needs to get done with or without whichever player. And he needs to hear that, dude. So with or without Sasha, with or without Sia, with or without Cheslin this weekend, with or without whoever it is that is not being selected, with or without that player, the Springboks should be okay, because the system is greater than the individual, because it always has been.
Don't waste it, brother. It's gone like this. Trust me. I also played professional sport and wasted it. It's gone like that. So, hey, listen, man, he has his own circle. Good luck to him. I just hope he realizes that Springboks were here before him. They were great before him. They'll be great after him. And if he realizes that, hey, I'm just a guardian of this great institution. Let me know in the chat, guys. 4 changes for the Boks. What do you think? Good, bad, indifferent? Should see a start? Is it important that the Boks win? Should he have played Sasha maybe to put him in a pressure moment before the World Cup comes in a year's time? It's probably the most important game the Springboks will play before the World Cup. We have to be honest. It's the highest sort of jeopardy series that they'll play before then. All right, Lesego, we're going to wrap up with a question from our viewers. It's a quick one. Remember, MKT inspires. You can slide in the DMs, the MKT show. Otherwise, leave a comment in the YouTube comments and we'll get to them and answer them. Let's bring up that question. It comes from Hilton on the social media. Hilton 6149. Hilton says, "Hi, I don't know how I got here, but it's a pleasure to see what you're trying to do here. You need to do some more research on the top 14 in France, because it's probably the most successful league in the world, where their franchises have more say than the national setup, and it's quite profitable." Well, here's the thing, Hilton. So I appreciate the question, and I'm glad you found your way here. So Hilton is addressing something we talked about, or I talked about, and my opinion is that international rugby is more important than club rugby, and rugby in general is trying to be like football, but it never can be because it's not a mass participation sport, and club rugby has always been amateur, and there isn't enough talent in the world to make club rugby the highest level of rugby. So international rugby is in fact the top level. And also the reason I was saying that, to give more context to the question, is that I think rugby needs to focus itself around international rugby. So listen, Hilton, Lesego's more of a rugby guy than I am, right? I think I love rugby, and I'm a hardcore rugby fan, but Lesego's all in on rugby. So I will say this. It's not true that the top 14 is profitable. There were 4 clubs in all of the top 14 that were profitable last year. I tried to keep I love the business of sport, right? So the rest of them are in the red. There are only 4 clubs in the top 14 that were, and the entire league made revenues of 464 million euros last year. It's a 65 million euro loss. So they don't have PSR or anything like that. So Hilton, I think sometimes you view all of these Stade Francais and these types of guys that are spending tens of millions of euros on players, and people think that is the common. It's not. The truth is they run at a loss every year because it's billionaires, and essentially what they're doing is they're parking their money essentially in a tax-free vehicle. That's really what's happening. Go and look at where in the world the ownership comes from. It's not Europeans. No, none of the clubs you're talking about are owned by Europeans. It's the Middle Eastern money, and they are parking their money in a vehicle in a first world country. So I will say that first and foremost. I have no problem with it, by the way. I always believe at the top level, there's no life lessons to be learned at the top. Just put the money people in charge and get the politicians out the way. So I like what the top 14 are trying to do. But Hilton, here's the problem. The best athletes in rugby are in New Zealand and they're in South Africa. And none of those countries yet are going to lose their top talent to those leagues. So you might say it's the best club rugby in the world. I still don't know how true that is. It might be the most flashy. It might be the most, hey, look at the signings we've got, and we'll take a Fijian here, we'll take a young Tongan here, we'll take some of the South African guys out of the best rugby system in the world, which is the South African schoolboy system. But I don't think it's going to move the needle because, quite frankly, it's a little bit off-putting to rugby people once it goes money heavy. It's an elitist sport, and trying to make it about money doesn't actually work for rugby. Lesego, I'll give you the last word on your thoughts on Hilton's question about the top 14 being the most profitable, and whether you think the rugby business model can ever switch from international rugby being the peak to, say, a top 14 being the peak of rugby in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe a good place to start is the structure, right? Let's look at how the Pro 14, Pro de Deux are structured. They're very interlinked, they're very intertwined. You know, they've got huge, they've passionately followed. The fan bases, whether it's in stadia or in the viewership, they're showing up week after week. They've really invested in the caliber and the quality of the grassroots system. I mean, yes, the SA Under-20s won the Junior World Cup this year, but the finalists were France, right? We won it last year. The 3 years prior was won by France thrice in a row. So the grassroots, so the system from grassroots to the Pro de to the Pro 14, and how well they all function over and above the supporting partners and sponsors and all those stakeholders. And the ecosystem it has created, I think, is what the point was, as opposed to the profitability of it. I think the ecosystem is rife. I think it definitely does pay dividends. Certainly in club, if you look at the events, the Champions Cup, the Investec Champions Cup, and how for the last 3 or 4 seasons it's been won by a French team, which is the premier European rugby tournament. It's been won by a French club. So it does have some sort of returns, and I think that's ultimately what it was talking about. And because of that, and because of how well structured it is, you see it a lot, and you definitely see it, and it happened again this year. That's why the French, Le Bleu, are very comfortable in sending the B and C team to go and tour New Zealand or whatever the case might be, because they would rather fret over the club and play in the Pro 14 final, which has a higher prize money available, and is a lot more prestigious to French rugby. They'd rather play that and prioritize that than flying 14, 15, 16, 17 hours across the world to play in the grander scheme of things, objectively speaking, an irrelevant relative to an irrelevant rugby series compared to top 14. So it does have that structure, it does have its prestige relative to its market. But the profitability, I think, is a slightly different thing. And I think what he was actually talking about is just the way in which they've built its ecosystem over, I think it's no more than 10 years, to see what they've been able to create in 10 years to now. So, yeah, and I think the rugby world all knows that the work in which they've done has been great, formidable, and they've been able to grow from it. It's something that we're aware of in the show.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, we are aware of it, and I think it's also they protect their home nations. I forget how many local players you have to play, so they do have like a quota for you've got to play a certain amount of French players, right? So they've got that going, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So maybe in 10 years' time, you're going to start to see France sort of consistently competing with the All Blacks and South Africa, because I think it's been completely overblown how good France are. They're not that good. They never tour, and lo and behold, they get to a quarterfinal, a semi-final. Oh, shocker! Shocker that Dupont isn't actually the second coming of Justin Marshall or US van der Westhuizen. And shocker that they choke when the big time comes. Because to your point, we discussed it between World Cups. Dupont doesn't tour. Which I think is very, very weird. But like you say, maybe in the French mind, and by the way, nobody's more parochial than the French. In their mind, no, we've already got the best rugby in the world. In their minds, top 14, Dupont just needs to play that, and it'll be good enough to beat the Springboks. Maybe right, maybe wrong. So Hilton, I think it's an interesting point that you're making. It's an interesting point that Lesego is making, and we'll see how that turns out. So let us know in the chat. Is top 14, is it the best rugby in the world? Am I, as a South African Southern Hemisphere rugby fan, wrong in saying that I still don't respect Northern Hemisphere rugby? Real rugby gets played in South African schools, in New Zealand schools, and then when the All Blacks play the Springboks, that's the best rugby in the world. There's nothing top 14. There's nothing the English pound or the Euros in France can do about that, just because of the quantity of athletes. Maybe I'm wrong. Let us know in the chat, in the comments, what you think. Springboks, New Zealand, second test coming up. Lesego, it's big. It's going to be, as the Oaks in South Africa say, it's going to be huge, bro. It's going to be huge. Oaks have to... in the words of one Dr. Rassie Erasmus, I think the Boks you got to fuck them up physically You got to fuck them up physically is what I'm quoting. That's a quote. I'm quoting. So before people say, oh, the bad language, that's a quote. I'm quoting Dr. Rassie for second test. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. I think interested to see how the Boks respond. Interested to see if New Zealand maintain, the good momentum that they created towards the latter parts of the first test. Interested to see who they field going to the second test. If you're asking for a prediction, I think the Springboks equalize, and I think it sets up a really, really, really enticing third test at FNB Stadium. I think the rugby world would love that, and I think other stakeholders alike would really appreciate a win for the Springboks in the second test. And I think that's ultimately what we're going to get.
Appreciate you, Lesego, brother. It's been real. We'll be back later this week as well. It has been the MKT show. Do the All Blacks win? Make it 2-0. Do the Boks win? Make it 1-1. Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Do you agree with Lesego? Do you agree with me? There's so much that we've discussed here. Absolutely love it. The Rugby's Greatest Rivalry moves into the second test. What happens? Does it shape the World Cup? Let us know in the comments below on YouTube. If you're on Spotify, remember you can leave a comment there so we can look there to answer your question on the show as well. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is MKT. He has been Lesego Thomas. This has been the MKT Show podcast. And for now, we are the hell out of here.